Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on what does effective consultation look like, preparing for the removal of statutory consultation requirements. I'm Tessa Lynn. I'm here as an associate of ASEP, the Association of Consultation and Engagement Professionals, also founder of Kingfisher Commons and a research associate at the University of Reading. I shall be chairing today's webinar today. Anyway, this webinar is not about me. We're here to explore what the current reforms to consultation in the planning system might mean in practice, particularly as the system moves towards fewer statutory consultees, greater use of standing advice, and an emphasis on speed and streamlining. This webinar is about hearing from practitioners working directly in this space, how they're anticipating change, what might shift in practice, and where the opportunities and risks are likely to lie. We'll be hearing about three broad areas. What is changing in consultation? How developers and infrastructure providers are responding to a more flexible approach? And what meaningful engagement with communities looks like in practice. After reflections from our speakers, we'll be moving into discussion and Q&A. So with that, I'd like to introduce the fantastic speakers who we are fortunate to hear from today, and who bring a different perspective on how consultation is evolving across infrastructure, utilities, and engagement practice. We'll hear short reflections from each of them before opening up into discussion. Our first speaker is Leo Cunningham-Bailey, DCO Consents Manager at Thames Water. Then we'll hear from Richard Boyle, Managing Director at Lionheart Public Affairs. And we'll finish the opening contributions with Donna Burnell, Head of External Affairs for Strategic Infrastructure at National Grid. Please do send the questions in the Q&A function, which you should see but below the images, the speaker's image. And if you can't see it, please do. You'll be able to find it by clicking the three dots. Yes. So now I will hand over to Leo to get us started. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tessa. Good morning, all. My name's Leo Cunningham-Bailey. I'm the Consents Manager working at Thames Water on the Whitehorse Reservoir project. My background's primarily in private consultancy, having worked at Quad and DWD. I then also did a spell in government at MHCLG, working on the NSIP reform programme there before coming across to Thames. So I suppose what I wanted to start with is sort of talk about the opportunities that come out of the changes that are happening to consultation. I think at its core, applicants do want to consult. It still remains possibly the most effective way to de-risk a DCO application. It allows you to see what communities, what stakeholders think of your project. It allows you to reflect on that, feed it into your design development, or at the very least, it allows all parties to be cited of each other's positions going into examination, which in turn allows everyone to focus on the real key issues that, the cruxes that need to be dealt with. So I think practitioners broadly agree that good consultation is still essential in practice, even if it no longer is mandatory in law. So these reforms don't signal, I think, from government an intention for there to be less consultation, but rather to enable better, more focused and proportionate consultation that fits the individual projects and communities. So it's not a sort of regression to how things perhaps were done in the 1980s of we're building a nuclear power station next to you, what colour would you like it? It's more about allowing more innovation to happen, I think, in this space, and greater latitude for applicants to decide what's right for their projects and the communities that they serve. So the old system, it's incredibly difficult, I think, to prescribe for quality in legislation. And that's really what was being done before, that, strict legal requirements set out in secondary legislation about what needed to be done and what good consultation looked like. Completely understand the motivation of it. But I think what it's probably led to is, over time, a real focus on legal compliance. And I think the issue with that is you can have a consultation which is legally compliant, but actually relatively poor in substance in theory. Equally, you could have a sort of best-in-class consultation that trips over a few legal tests, missing a prescribed consultee from notification, something like that, which then becomes effectively a bad consultation despite having really good outcomes. So I think the strong emphasis has been on legal compliance as the bare minimum. Understandably, I think it means that applicants have spent a huge amount of time with their lawyers, locked in rooms, thinking about legal compliance with regulations, managing legal exposure, and perhaps with the changes that are now coming in, that's time and energy that could be better spent on other areas of consultation, improving clarity, accessibility, and the usefulness of engagement materials. So I think what this change probably does is removes that spectre of legal challenge from being quite as prevalent, and hopefully avoids projects ending up in a sort of cycle of consultation, which can happen, which is frustrating for communities and applicants alike. So the devil is in the guidance, I think. With all of this, the guidance is going to be doing some really heavy lifting here with the stripping out, presumably, of a lot of what is in the secondary legislation currently. And the guidance, if it's done well, will focus around principles rather than rules, encouraging better consultation, avoiding rigid formats, and allowing practice to evolve over time. But if it's done badly, it could become overly prescriptive, and you may end up with a similar kind of situation to what we currently have, albeit set out in guidance instead of secondary legislation. So, as ever with these things, it's going to be really interesting to see what government puts in that guidance and how it works. But room for cautious optimism that it's going to be much more principle driven. So another really big change, the removal of the preliminary environmental information report, the PEER, which I'm sure a lot of us on the call are familiar with. So I think there's strong support for not having to do a PEER in the way that we have done historically. I think the current way of doing things with the PEER at StatCon, it can create, I think, overly negative assessments of what the scheme is, because to ensure you're consulting at the right time and doing it at a formative stage, that quite often means you're also consulting at a time where there is still more survey data to come in, there is more design development that is being done. And as a result, it can force some applicants to, I think, take a very precautionary approach to the assumptions they use to produce their PEER. And that in turn can make it, I guess, to some extent alarming or even misleading to communities as to what the true impacts of the scheme will ultimately be. And it also generates very long lists of potential likely significant effects, which can create a lot of noise and make it quite difficult, I think, for some communities to really understand what are the issues that are of most interest to them and the detail around them. And they are also pretty impenetrable documents, even when written really well with a non-technical summary. They can be really difficult to interpret if you're, a lay person without sort of environmental planning background. So I think engaging on the environmental effects of a scheme remain critical and really, really important for applicant and communities and other stakeholders. But if it can be done through perhaps different forms of engagement that allow a more easy to interpret understanding of what the actual effects are likely to be, rather than, I think, the fear of not having given yourself enough room to work with in the future, driving quite large Rochdale envelopes and therefore generating a lot of negative reporting of effects, that can only be a good thing. Another point I wanted to talk to is, I suppose, around the risk of over consulting and community fatigue that the current system does have sort of baked into it. So it's an issue where I think a lot of people will find that they consult at a formative stage, learn more or do more scheme development, and then find that they think to manage legal risk, they then have to go back and do more targeted consultation. And that can beget a sort of cycle of consultation, which definitely can cause consultation fatigue among stakeholders, and is more, I think, driven by that legal risk and the fear of future legal challenge than it is around really giving the community the information they desire to understand the scheme and inform it. So I think there is an opportunity here for more proportionate approach, really, to updating communities as designs develop, as more information becomes available, as you get closer to your application. There's going to be a really important role for the planning inspector here, I think, in terms of having this new guidance. Their ability to help work with applicants to ensure that they're preparing their approach to consultation in a way that meets the requirements of the guidance, and also is keeping pace with best practice and knowledge learned from other projects, going to be really, really critical. So I think you're going to see applicants leaning a lot more on the planning inspectorate than they have done perhaps historically, in lieu of that really strict, rigid statutory framework for how you consult. And again, I think also engaging with local authorities, the SOC as we know it will cease to be, as I understand it, but having that local knowledge from host authorities as to the different groups they have in their constituent areas, what they have learned from other DCO applications, that's all still going to be really good knowledge for applicants to draw on as they think about what is the right approach for their project and the communities that they are serving. Consultation report as well, obviously still going to be a thing, but I think that will evolve and hopefully be a little less of a checklist of have we met all of the requirements and gone about things exactly as the statutes require with the dropping out of the legal requirements, and be more of a focused report on, what have we heard through our engagement, through our consultation, how have we approached it sort of philosophically to try and get the most out of the communities and the stakeholders, and less about that kind of have we ticked every box that we needed to in order to be legally compliant. I think the other thing that sits behind all of this is the gunning principles are still there. They're not disappearing. If we're consulting, we still have to have regard to those and think very carefully about how we do it. And I think they remain very solid tests for what a good consultation should be. Consulting at a formative stage, sufficient information, adequate time, and reflecting on the responses you've got, consciously considering them. So that's still going to drive how we go about things. That hasn't gone away. Lawyers, understandably, will still be involved and still be referring back to those gunning principles. But I think the change overall does give much more leeway to do things differently to we have before, and be just much more proportionate, pragmatic, and come up with ultimately better consultations, which should, I think, if you are a layperson, a member of the public, have a project in your area, I think you should be able to be engaged with in a way that's going to be much more geared towards your needs and your understanding, rather than being given a load of information you might not have any interest in because it says so in the secondary legislation to do so. So I guess in conclusion, greater room for innovation, potential consultations that could be better suited to communities, but the guidance will be absolutely key. So if that becomes overly prescriptive, we may end up with a very similar situation to what we've got now. If it's more principle driven, it could be a real success there. PINS's role is going to be really important in interpreting that advice. And regardless of the changes we've talked about, those key gunning principles still need to be at the heart of every consultation. So I think that's me taking through my ramble on that. I shall pass over to other speakers.
Thank you, Leo. That's fantastic. It's great summary there as well. Curiosity around what the guidance is going to say. Okay, so I will now hand over to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Good morning, everyone. And thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to take part in this. So just by way of introduction, so I've previously been the head of public affairs and communications for Equinor, who I'm sure many of you will know as a major global energy company, and I've focused on their low carbon projects in the UK. So primarily hydrogen, carbon capture, decarbonised power, sustainable aviation fuels, and so on. And I've done a lot of both the national lobbying and comms, but also a lot of the localised community consultation and stakeholder engagement on a lot of those projects. But I've also spent about 20 years in different lobbying and stakeholder engagement roles in different industries and sectors, so including gambling, food and drink, property development, pharmaceuticals. And so I've dealt with quite a lot of these different areas in housing, retail, logistics, airports, ports, wind farms, solar. So I've worked on quite a few different projects from both the national and the community level. But I also have a political background. I started off as a political advisor to MPs and ministers. I've been an election agent. I've fought quite a few elections myself, both at council level and at parliamentary level. never successfully, yet I might add. They say that the electorate is never wrong, but here I am. So, but what I hope that I can bring to this panel is a bit more of the political flavour of, I guess, the impact of these sort of things and what particularly local politicians and communities look for in terms of the engagement and the consultation that we do. So I'm not a technical or a legal person, so I'm very glad that we've got people and experts like Leo on the panel who can kind of answer those questions for us. But hopefully I can bring a slightly different perspective on it. So if you wouldn't mind going on to my next slide, please. So I think, as I suspect we'll all say this morning, the devil's going to be in the detail on this, and I thought I'd reflect a bit on why I think there is a need for change and whether it should be welcomed more broadly. And I think, broadly speaking, it's the right direction, and we should welcome it as being a beneficial step. Although I do have some reservations, given the way the government has been so far. I don't think any of us would be surprised if we're still here at the next election and we've not moved any further, right? So I think it remains to be seen whether or not we actually get what they have been talking about and what's in the proposals so far. But I think the principle of trying to streamline processes, speed up applications, be more pragmatic, reduce bureaucracy, reduce barriers to growth. I think those are the things that should all be welcomed by business, particularly at the moment in this economic climate. And this concept of getting Britain building, I think, is really important. So we've all known that there's been a housing crisis for a long time now, but there's also an infrastructure crisis. And I say this as somebody who's based up in the north of England, where the infrastructure, particularly things like transport, can be really, really difficult, and I think are a barrier to economic growth in terms of trying to encourage people to be based up here for their careers, encourage businesses to move up here, and so on. So I think that the trying to get some of that infrastructure moving where it's been paused for quite a while is really important. I think we're also currently in a bit of an economic situation where we have where investor confidence has been knocked because, and I say this as well, particularly coming from the energy industry, where there's been constant delays to strategies being published, to policies being published, to processes and funding competitions being announced, and every delay that happens has an impact on investors, on board decisions, on shareholders' confidence in the actions of the companies. So I think we need to be operating in a scenario and an environment where the country wants to have things built, and that requires that communities and local governments and secretaries of state and everybody is on board with that. So I think that moving in that direction where we're trying to encourage things to get built is really important. I don't think we can continue to kind of go around in circles like we have done on some major infrastructure projects in the UK, where every 5 years or 10 years we say, yes, we're going to do this. And then the next government comes in and says, no, we're not. And then they come in and say, yes, we are. No, we're not. And we go around in circles and nothing happens, because that has really big consequences to investors and to growth, and in the end to things like jobs and infrastructure at a localized level. I also think it's really important to have that flexibility for proposals. No two are the same, and I think it's really important to encourage that. Controversially, I think we might ask ourselves whether there's been a bit too much people power in the past. I'm sure we can all think of examples where major projects, as well as smaller projects, have been held up by by individuals or by groups, sometimes with big money backers, sometimes with political motivations. And they get so far, and they're really, their priority is to run down the clock. And for them, success is just stopping this from happening because developers get fed up and walk away. And that might be a success for them, but it's not a success for our economy and for our communities as a whole. And I also think that we've had a bit of a difficulty with politicians and communities not really understanding the planning process and what it's about and how it should function. And this is particularly the case more in town and country planning rather than DCOs. But we have situations where councillors on planning committees don't understand that they're there trying to perform a sort of quasi-judicial function, adhering to legal requirements. And at the end of the day, they're there because their voters want them to perform a certain way and want them to stop something from happening potentially. And they have to be influenced by that because their position is based upon what their voters want to do at the next, which way they want to vote at the next election. So I think there is inevitably a difficulty with putting political people, politicians who are subject to the electorate in a role which is not meant to be political. Right. So I think ensuring that they have better training, better understanding, and that communities hopefully understand that a bit better is really important. You just go to the next slide, please. So in terms of what are the implications of the potential changes, I think a lot of this depends on whether or not developers want to stick to best practice, gold standard way of doing things, or whether they want to go with the minimum requirements. And I think my instinct is they'll probably choose the latter over a period of time. Particularly, at the moment, as I say, we're in a difficult economic situation. A lot of developers and businesses are cutting back and reducing headcounts, reducing resources. Are they going to look at this as an opportunity to try to, one less piece of consultation, one less thing to spend money on, one less thing to spend an extra 6 months or so on? I think I would like to see that that's not the case. I suspect it might end up being that way. I think in the short term, probably developers will carry on as they are out of familiarity. But I think long term it might move away from that, and I think that there's the potential for that to erode trust in the link between communities and development. So many of us will operate things like community liaison groups, where I think everything is about the slow build-up of trust over a period of time, regular meetings with community representatives, and giving a kind of a safe space where they can ask questions and so on. And I think it's really important to have that development of trust and relationships over a period of time. And there's a potential that this gets lost within these changes. And also, we don't do consultation only because we're told to do it and because it's a legal requirement. We do it sometimes because of that, but there's also benefits to our final projects, because I'm sure we can all think of examples where a project has been tweaked because of what an individual has said at an exhibition, or the sort of the group feedback that we've got as a result of a consultation process, as something that we've not thought of, or some piece of information that the community knows that the developer doesn't. And that's valuable for the project as well as for the community. So that kind of ability to stress test things and to reduce risk at an earlier stage, I think helps the project as a whole and reduces future challenges. So it's helpful for both the developer and for the communities. I also think it helps to remove a bit of a pressure valve. So the fact that people feel like rightly feel like they are being listened to and involved in processes, I think gives them that kind of feeling that they're being included. And I think potentially if that's removed, there will be a need to kind of voice those feelings and that feeling of powerlessness elsewhere. And I think it's very easy for this to become a political football. Again, something we see really regularly. People don't like developments on a local level that can have real impact when it comes to local elections and things like that. So it's very easy for council candidates to stand up and say, it's a real shame you've not been listened to on this, and I'll give you a voice and make sure you are listened to, and we'll stop this from happening. And so I think it's very easy for this to become a political football. So if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide for me, please. So just sort of returning to what the central question of this webinar is, which is what will effective consultation look like? I think this is very much a case of a lot of things have changed, but nothing has changed. And the big question for me is whether or not developers will continue to try to go along with a sort of gold standard and show that they're doing the best that they possibly can in consultation, or whether they're willing to kind of take this as an opportunity to take a step back from it. But the reality is the principles of stakeholder engagement and community consultation remain the same, and those principles are engage early, avoid surprises, encourage participation, be open to change. So the earlier that you consult, the more open you are to be able to be flexible and to be influenced by the feedback. It's really important to go in, I think, with a scheme that isn't a fait accompli and isn't completely finished. So that people have the opportunity to feedback and say, we don't like this, we don't like that, can you change this? And through your feedback and your consultation reports in the past, you've been able to show that this person has said this, or this is the feedback we've got, and this is what we've changed as a result. And I really think that's an important link that we don't want to lose. I think it's really important also to be very responsive and to be accurate and to be honest. I think a lot of communities and individuals are relatively willing to accept that there are things that sometimes happen that they don't always support, but that what they don't like is feeling like they've got the wool pulled over their eyes, and that people haven't been entirely honest with them. So I think being honest about, yes, there are things that we can do to change and to reflect your feedback, but some areas we can't change that because X, Y, and Z, I think is really important and very valuable. I think using local people and community advocates where possible is really important. So I'm based in Hull. I get selected a lot of the time to cover projects in and around the Humber because I'm a local person, because I understand where places are and I know what the local issues are. I was asked recently to do something in Northern Ireland, and I kind of said I don't think I'm the right person for that. So I think having those people who are kind of local advocates and representatives is really important. And I think mixing your type of methods and platforms, exhibitions, one-to-one meetings, online, social media, and so on is really important. And finally, focusing on what matters to local communities and local people. I think it's very easy, often as big companies in particular, to go in and talk about national level policies, targets, and policy documents. And what local people want to hear is, what's in it for me? What local community initiatives are you supporting? What jobs are local people going to have? What local businesses are benefiting in the supply chain, and so on. I think I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much, Richard. Another fantastic summary there. So that we'll move swiftly on to Donna. Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. Hi, I'm Donna, and I head up the External Affairs team working on strategic infrastructure at National Grid. I've been leading consultation engagement strategies for major infrastructure projects for over 20 years. Over the next 10 minutes, I'll run through an introduction to National Grid and the major infrastructure projects which make up our Great Grid Upgrade programme. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how our approach to consultation and engagement for these projects will be adapted following the recent change in planning legislation, and how that change can support our work as a developer and also benefit the communities we're consulting with. Thank you. Next slide, please. So National Grid doesn't generate electricity. We own and maintain the high voltage network in England and Wales. We transport large amounts of electricity at high voltage from where it is generated to where it is needed. The local network operators then deliver it at lower voltages to individual homes and businesses. The parts of National Grid involved in this are shown in the diagram, each with their own roles and responsibilities across England and Wales. So I work for National Grid Electricity Transmission, NGET, which sits at the heart of Britain's energy system. Every time a phone is plugged in or a switch is turned on, we've played a part in connecting you to the electricity you're using. Under the Electricity Act 1989, we must develop proposals for new infrastructure in an efficient, coordinated and economic way, which also considers people, places and the environment. And that legislation guides us when we're building or looking to build new projects. Thank you. Next slide, please. So you may have heard about the Great Grid Upgrade. This is the largest overhaul of the electricity grid in generations, and it includes major infrastructure projects that will both scale up and update our existing network. It will enable us to carry more homegrown renewable energy from where it's generated to where it's needed, and it will boost Britain's energy security. Thank you. Next slide. So much of the high voltage electricity transmission network was built in the 1960s, and it was designed to transport electricity from large coal-fired power stations in the North and the Midlands and Wales. But in recent years, we've seen a change in the way we generate and use electricity, and we need to build the grid now, which is fit for the future. You may be aware that demand for electricity is set to double by 2050, as the way we power our homes, businesses and industry and transport changes. And where we generate electricity is changing too. We're seeing an increase in generation from offshore wind and across Scotland, the northeast and the east of England in particular. And in these places, there is currently a very limited network along the coast. So we need to build new power lines to bring the electricity from the coast to where it's needed. If we do not upgrade the network to accommodate this increase in generation, we would have to pay generators and interconnectors not to operate. And this cost is ultimately passed on to customers' electricity bills. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide shows where we're currently developing projects, and you'll see that the majority are in the east of the country. Each project is unique, but they fall into three broad categories: new offshore links, new onshore infrastructure, and upgrades to existing infrastructure. And it's important, I think, to point out that the types of projects and technologies that make up the Great Grid Upgrade are not new. While the scale and pace is different, we've successfully delivered new offshore links, overhead lines, tunnels and cables for many decades. And the projects that we have here are at very different stages of development and delivery. We have 6 projects currently in construction, and we have 13 in various stages of public consultation and the consenting process. And we expect further projects to be identified in the future. Thank you. Next slide, please. In the UK, we develop our projects mostly under several planning regimes, but most of our Great Grid Upgrade projects are considered nationally significant infrastructure projects and therefore require a development consent order known as a DCO. This is the most complex and challenging planning regime in the UK, and applications are subject to approval by the Secretary of State. We've been developing projects under this regime since the original Planning Act back in 2008, and we're committed to delivering the right technology in the right place, informed by local feedback through consultation. We've already obtained 3 DCOs for projects in construction, and last year we submitted a further 2 DCO applications and 7 Town and Country Planning Act applications. This year we're set to submit a further 2 DCOs and 3 the year after. So you can see it's a really busy time for us under this. Thank you. Next slide, please. So talking about the new Planning and Infrastructure Act, we really welcome this recently passed legislation and the government's willingness to push further on planning reform. We actively engaged with MHCLG, DESNES and the Treasury at every stage of the legislation's development, and we believe the measures in the Act will help to accelerate the delivery of our projects. We will continue to engage with the government on the forthcoming secondary legislation to ensure that the reforms are robust and flexible. Next slide, please. So I feel that the Planning and Infrastructure Act provides fresh opportunities. Removing the requirement for statutory consultation means that we can adopt a more agile and flexible approach to consultation, tailored to the specific needs of each project and the nearby communities. This approach has the potential to reduce end-to-end programme timelines. However, the scale of any time saving will only become clear once government guidelines is published and we understand how the revised arrangements are intended to operate in practice for specific projects. But consultation remains crucial. Although consultation will no longer be a statutory requirement, it will remain an important tool for identifying issues early and reducing consent risk. It will allow potential concerns to be addressed early and way before the examination process. The government guidance should bring more clarity, and we will refine our consultation approach once we receive this guidance, which we expect to be issued over the coming months. Thank you. Next slide, please. So through this, our ambition is always to deliver a industry-leading integrated communications campaign across our portfolio, which will enhance National Grid's reputation and deliver the Great Grid upgrade. This is underpinned by the 5 C's that you can see on the slide. Our approach to engagement is very much to focus on our colleagues, and we deliver consultation training for those working within and as part of the project team. For communities, we research the local areas, building social economic profiles of the regions, undertake stakeholder mapping, and really endeavour to have a sound understanding of the community we are operating in. We take a campaign approach, producing simple, accessible and engaging literature, media and social media materials to promote our projects and the positive contribution they will make to the country, region and to the local area. And throughout the development stage of the project, we consult with local residents, their representatives and statutory stakeholders such as the local planning authorities. And also we are keen to identify and collaborate with potential partners and supporters to work to deliver tangible community benefits and leave a lasting positive legacy where we are working. Thank you. Next slide, please. So consultation remains an important part of the planning process as it enables everyone to comment on our proposals. All infrastructure projects have both impacts and benefits locally and nationally, and we will continue to consult through all stages of the planning and construction process. The feedback from consultation, along with the outcome of technical assessments and environmental surveys, helps us to develop our proposals and also our construction mitigation strategies. Next slide, please. So we abide very much with the guiding principles to ensure our public consultations are run to be fair and lawful, and to ensure that consultations are meaningful, transparent, and legally defensible. We also use opinion polling and social economic research to help us develop our regional and project-specific messaging. Next slide, please. So we are keeping the fundamentals of local engagement. But now we can target what we do to ensure that we use the most appropriate channels in the most appropriate locations and to engage more meaningfully on specific issues. This means we won't always need a village hall event where a pop-up or attendance at existing events might better reach the audience. And we can very much adapt the ways we consult and the timing and the locations to the audiences that we need to reach. Without the formalities of statutory consultation, we can be more creative and identify more appropriate engagement mechanisms from our toolkit to ensure we reach the right audience and achieve effective and meaningful engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maxine. It's great to hear how this is likely to impact in practice. Thank you to the panel. It's been great to hear all of your wisdom and experiences. So moving swiftly on to, we've got a few questions in the Q&A. So to all the participants, please do submit any further questions via the Q&A button. First of all, I think, Donna, you may have answered this one in your presentation from Helen Bruto. When do we expect the government guidance to be published?
Well, we're expecting it within the next month or so.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
I wouldn't want to put an exact date with the government, but that's when we're expecting it.
For sure. Thank you very much. The next question is for Richard, firstly, and then the panel. In respect to too much people power, do you think the revisions made to limit DCO legal challenge options will be effective? We have just seen the first judge refer to a case entirely without merit. Will there be many more, and should that be extended to TCPA too?
Well, thank you for your question. I think whether it'll be effective, we hope so, I suppose. I think the reality is that we've probably seen a scenario where, for a long time, where it's been probably too easy to challenge proposals without legal merit. And I think we've all seen examples where challenges and appeals have gone a long way, and sort of the wait until the time limit and then submit another piece of information, then submit another, and it drags on and drags on, and then eventually it gets thrown out and they say, well, there was no merit in this anyway. And the reality of that is that destroys investor confidence. In a lot of cases, we'll be dealing with international businesses who can just as easily build something in another country as build it in the UK if it's far too difficult to do so, and that impacts on jobs and so on at a local level as well. But also, particularly at a town and country planning level, that impacts on councils and taxpayers' money, because if we have a situation where things are thrown out and then won on appeal, then more often than not, it's the councils that have to pay for that. Councils increasingly struggling to cover costs and resources anyway, and that tends to only go in one direction, which is to put extra money onto extra charges onto council tax bills and so on. So I think that things haven't been in the right position for quite a long time, and I think the principle of trying to move things in the direction of being streamlined and trying to prevent, we're not trying to prevent genuine challenges, which I think are really important, but the challenges that come across without legal merit, of which I think there are quite a lot at the moment. So hopefully that will prevent them.
Thank you, Richard. That's great. Any further reflections from Donna or Leo?
I think that covered it from my side.
It's trying to sort of lift out the vexatious sort of challenges where they are just trying to, I suppose, stop a project, and it isn't really about the procedural points from those that are about procedural mistakes, and obviously the ability to challenge decision project mistake via judicial review is a really important principle. So maintaining that, I think, trying to make sure there's a way to avoid it being, I guess, used to frustrate bringing projects forward rather than make sure decisions made consistently on the right information. There's always a tension there, I think.
Thank you, Leo. Okay, the next question. When you go in early to consultation without much detail, you can constantly get questions that you can't answer and accusations that you don't have enough information or don't know anything, maps aren't detailed enough. Do you have any advice on how to manage this conflict of going in too early or too late? Please, Donna.
From my experience, I think it's always good to go in early. I don't think it's ever too early to start building relationships and opening communication channels with communities and their representatives. I think it's about the messaging and being clear about the project process and the timeline. So explaining where you are in the project development process and when more information will become available, and being very clear on that and explaining that it's an early stage of the project, but you want to understand their initial thoughts around the work that you're doing, and you want to explain why you need to do it and what the benefits it may bring. Always making sure that you do stay in touch with those individuals and those community representatives as well, and going back at regular intervals in order to keep them informed. And I think it's also useful to develop relationships at an early point of the process, because you will be able to explain what feedback you will be looking for and how they will be able to influence the proposals once those details become available. So from my perspective, early engagement is definitely a good way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And Leo?
Am I mute now? Apologies. I don't think I have anything to add there. That was a really comprehensive answer from Tyler. Apologies.
Thank you, Leo. And Richard?
Well, yeah, I mean, I also agree with everything that Donna has just said, and I think, just to reflect that the kind of the openness and honesty aspect of that, and in explaining the process, is really important. I think that the criticisms of consulting early kind of come with the territory of having to do it, and you just have to accept that being the case. I think people just want to see that they are being involved and genuinely consulted and genuinely have the opportunity to feedback and influence things. And that doesn't have to be a massive thing. I don't think people want to completely redesign schemes and start afresh. But I think giving them the opportunity to even have a say on things like landscaping or access points or what community facilities or S106 things they can benefit from, I think is really important. So it's just giving them a couple of things which I think makes them feel involved and like they have the ability to feedback and influence things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. I was involved in some really interesting research on pre-applications. So please do look up for the publication. Okay, moving swiftly on to the next question. There is a strong emphasis here on the guidance. Should businesses keep aligned with the previous legal requirements whilst this is still in development? Donna, please, your hand went up first.
I was just going to say that is the guidance that we currently have. Is until the new guidance comes out, we should continue to work in the spirit of the way that we have up until now. And indeed, we're developing projects and we're going into consultation on projects at the moment, and we're continuing to follow very closely the way we've approached consultation in the past. So until the new guidance is published, that is my understanding, that we continue to go with how it was up until now.
Thank you, Donna. And Leo?
Sorry, yeah, just to add as well, I think the transitional arrangements is sort of yet to be seen, but as I understand it, I think the trigger may be the Section 46 letter that you would send to PINS. So if you've already issued that, you're in the old system. If you haven't yet and the guidance comes in, then you'd be in the new system, I believe. But I think that all needs to be seen as the guidance comes through.
Thank you. Okay, question here for Donna. How does National Grid use AI as a consultation method?
Well, that's a really interesting question. AI is something that we are really starting to look at and embrace. At this stage, it's coming in tactical opportunities. We're using AI to support our project websites and some of the materials that we're producing. I think it's something that we will be developing more going forwards. So I will ask me again next year and I may have a much stronger answer for you. But at the moment, it's something we are looking at and we're taking forwards.
Fantastic, thank you. Can we get some examples of innovative approaches to consultations, such as holding a drop-in event at a certain place or using digital tools to reach people? And sort of reading on to the next question here as well. And how can we do more to avoid communities feeling that it is all a fait accompli? I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly. Thank you. Richard, first, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've perhaps dealt with the fait accompli question, which is, to go in early and to be open and honest and give people genuine opportunities to feedback and influence things. In terms of innovative approaches, I mean, I think there's a degree of trying to go out to communities and people rather than expecting them to come to you. So I think there's certainly a role to be played by putting information in things like local libraries, shopping centres, doctors' surgeries, having sort of pop-up stands and things there, and so you're kind of getting people where there's the most footfall. I think that definitely helps in terms of making sure that people, in terms of accessibility for people, but there's also there's a project that I was working on a while back that we were looking at doing seismic surveys, and we were a bit concerned about how the community might view these kind of big lorry type things going down their road and sort of doing shocks through the ground. And one of the ideas that we came up with was why not just kind of demask that a little bit, and invite sort of local kids to come and have a look at this massive lorry and have a ride in, have the photo taken in it and that sort of thing. And actually that helped to get the community on board and helped to make them feel involved in it and demystify some of the things. So I think it's worth trying innovative things where you can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. And Donna, Leo, do you have any further things to add? Yes, please, Donna.
I was just going to add, for many of the projects that we work on are long linear projects. So we are looking at ways of focusing more. So with a long linear project, you'll have many different communities along the route, and they vary. They can vary quite substantially over 100 kilometers, for example. So looking at different community-based consultations, which may be different as we progress along a route. We may have a very rural environment where the engagement needs to be very much focused around the rural population and the working hours of the farmers and the people that work there. And then we may go through an urban location as well, and we have a different needs, different time frames, different locations where we may go to shopping centres, railways, etc. So with the opportunities that we're beginning to see is being able to be much more sort of community focused in the ways in which we engage going forwards.
Fantastic. Thank you, Donna. Leo, any further comments to add on that?
No, I agree with all of that. I suppose the fundamental point is understanding those communities really well so that what you're developing is really bespoke to them. And obviously the better your understanding, the better tools you can develop to engage with them.
Fantastic. I'm just scrolling down as well to some further questions further that are relative to this in terms of what proportionate and meaningful engagement might look like in practice. And do any of you use deliberative approaches alongside business as usual approaches? So if you have anything further to add to what you just said here about sort of meaningful engagement, that would be a great time to share.
I mean, just to say, it's a tension we've sort of grappled with throughout this webinar, that doing things at an early stage when things are formative is always in direct tension to having all the answers and being able to give people clarity and assurance on exactly what's happening. So I think that's always something to contend with. And I've found myself at several StatCons sort of saying, yeah, here is what we're consulting on, what do you think? And being told we haven't necessarily given them the totality of the information about it, and needing to explain that's because we haven't heard from them yet. Essentially, we need to understand what people think to fold that into our thinking, into the design. And the alternative is that fait accompli point, which is somewhere you should never be. But formative doesn't necessarily mean early, I suppose. It's just that you can still make changes to the design in sight of those responses that you get.
Thank you, Leo. And whilst you're on with the next questions directly for yourself, if you reflect on the White Horse Reservoir journey using the lens of this new legislation, how would you retrospectively change when and how Thames consulted on the reservoir?
Yeah, I've been mulling that over for the last couple of minutes since I saw that question come in. I think the truth of it is that the core of that consultation would probably stay pretty similar. It is a large project. It is affecting quite a few communities in that area who have a real interest in there. So I think the duration would have been similar. I think the approach we went through to speak with the councils to really understand how they think a good consultation would look, what methods we should be using, what communities we should be speaking to, where events should be, all of that would still happen. I suppose something we might have looked at if this was in that sort of alternative universe of the need to consult statutory already been gone, would possibly be see if there's something else we could do around the peer, because I think they are incredibly complex documents that for most of the intended audience aren't actually that helpful. So I wonder if there's something else we could do in terms of innovation around that. The NTS that you get with peers try and do a bit of that, but I feel like it still can be pretty impenetrable. So it's a bit of a non-answer that I'd want to see what else was being done, I guess, in best practice around communicating environmental impacts to communities. But I think that might be a key area we'd have looked at.
Thank you, Leo. I'm moving swiftly on to the next question with some context here, but directly the question is, do you have any tips for how to draw out LPA engagement in the new consultation environment? Please, Richard.
Well, I mean, I would just say that often developers, I think, treat local authorities as a single entity, and they're not. They're made up of lots of different people with lots of different roles, and there's a difference between the planning officers and the direct employees of a local authority and the elected representatives. And I think this is where there's an opportunity where actually people power can work in the direction of local communities saying we want to have a say, or we want something to happen, or we want to be involved in this. Local councillors raising issues on your behalf. I think using the kind of bottom-up approach, if you're not being successful in trying to get to officers in another way, is really important. And that's where I think local representatives, elected representatives, have a really valuable part to play in trying to help businesses get to the people that are meant to work for us all. So I just don't treat it as if we've been told, or we're not getting we're not getting anywhere trying to get to one person. Look for other angles to get through to them.
Thank you, Richard. And I think we've got time for one more question. What can you see being the implications of having to re-educate communities, especially action groups, on the reforms? Please, Leo.
I think this might be an area where the Planning Advisory Service could do some really good work. I think they obviously are getting increasingly involved in the sort of NSIP space and doing some really interesting things. And I think communicating the reforms, the changes, what it means for members of the public and also action groups would probably be a really helpful area for them to be investigating.
Thank you very much. Donna, did you have a quick note to say just there?
Well, I think I'm hoping that to some degree, being able to be more targeted and getting to know your communities better and identifying better ways of engaging with them will help to do this just by default, because engaging in a more successful way, this will be very much part of part of our messaging is this: there are more and better opportunities now to engage with us on our projects. So this should be seen as a benefit to communities rather than a disbenefit.
Okay, what a great note to end on. Thank you so much to the panelists today for sharing their wisdom and experience, and everyone for attending the webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be shared with you via email. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.